Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because if you thought mornings were for coffee and emails, think again. This morning, a war broke out as if someone sneezed and accidentally hit launch all missiles on the global keyboard. And no, this is not your friendly neighborhood armchair strategy game. It's real, it's happening now, and your Twitter feed is probably already on fire trying to keep up. In the blink of an eye, the Middle East transformed from a geography lesson in high school textbooks to a live-action R-rated geopolitical thriller. The United States, ever the proud purveyor of freedom fries and high-precision bombs, suddenly finds itself in the starring role of a drama that could have been written by Kafka if Kafka had been obsessed with drones and strategic fuel supplies. You can almost hear the opening theme: frantic generals, flustered diplomats, and economists updating the price of oil by the millisecond. What's particularly amusing in a tragicomic sense is that wars in the 21st century now have the immediacy of a reality show. Gone are the days when news traveled by telegraph or even CNN's live feed. Now, satellites, smartphones, and everyone's neighbor's uncle with a GoPro can broadcast the carnage as it happens. It's like keeping up with the commanders, but with more missiles and fewer Kardashians. Meanwhile, reputations hang in the balance. For the US, whose global image often wavers somewhere between invincible superpower and that country that can't decide whether to invade or negotiate, this morning's events are a brutal reminder that world order is as delicate as the last slice of pie at a 4th of July barbecue. One wrong move and the careful construction of international alliances, treaties, and mutual understandings, which took generations and the occasional inconvenient war, could crumble faster than a fast food cookie. Of course, civilians and policymakers alike are left staring at the unfolding chaos with a mixture of horror and the resigned fascination of someone watching a car crash in slow motion on TikTok. And let's not forget the humorously predictable American spin machine, press releases praising surgical precision, while the actual operation seems to resemble a toddler's first attempt at assembling IKEA furniture. Lots of effort, pieces everywhere, and a lingering question of whether it's structurally sound. If you're already thinking, wow, this is intense, congratulations. You've just described the very essence of modern war reporting, live and unscripted. And if you want the best running commentary, with the kind of snarky insight that makes you question how anyone survived high school civics class, then, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the Refoundation channel, because who else will give you the news with both a straight face and a raised eyebrow? But enough with the caffeine-fueled chaos. Before we move on to analyzing the strategic and historical lenses that frame this conflict, let's pause and ask ourselves, are we about to watch history repeat itself, or just a very expensive season of America, the Tactical Reality Show? Next, we dive into the strategic and historical lens through which the US views itself and its eternal role in the world order. If part 1 was your morning cup of chaotic espresso, part 2 is the bitter aftertaste. A jolt of history, strategy, and the kind of self-congratulatory "we've seen this before" wisdom only Americans can deliver while sipping artisanal coffee in a bunker somewhere. For decades, analysts, historians, and retired generals with impeccably pressed khakis have examined U.S. foreign policy through what they call constitutional prudence and classical liberalism. Translation: we're supposed to be smart and careful, but we really like our toys, and sometimes we forget the manual. The assumption is that America, armed with democracy, drones, and the occasional catchy slogan like "Mission Accomplished," oops, can chart the course of world events with mathematical precision. But history has a way of laughing at even the most meticulously drafted memos. Vietnam? Check. Iraq? Check. Afghanistan? Check, check, and triple check. Each time, the lesson, subtle, ignored, and then relearned at great cost, is roughly: power does not equal control, and smart people can still make spectacularly expensive mistakes. In this particular conflict, that historical lens matters because it frames both expectation and disappointment. Generals and scholars alike assume that wars should be neat. Objectives defined, phases sequenced, resources allocated, everyone wearing crisp uniforms and acting like characters in a strategy board game. Reality, as anyone watching live footage can see, prefers chaos, improvisation, and occasionally sarcastic commentary from local news anchors who clearly did not study Target Dex 101. American observers often approach these crises with a blend of pride and paranoia. Pride, because the US genuinely believes it has perfected the science of projecting force. Paranoia, because even the most limited failure will be spun by critics and comedians alike as proof that Washington cannot assemble IKEA furniture without international assistance. The result is a unique form of national cognitive dissonance. The country simultaneously congratulates itself for military prowess and panics when, for the first time in decades, a plan doesn't go exactly according to slide deck projections. Then there's the press coverage, always a fun show. The American media tends to treat strategic analysis like a high-stakes episode of Survivor. Alliances will crumble, leadership will change, and viewers at home are encouraged to speculate wildly while commentators wield metaphors like flamethrowers. Will this war redefine the rules of engagement? Is the Republic in peril? Can we get more coffee? All of it blends into a heady cocktail of anxiety, patriotism, and absurdity. And here's the subtle, delicious irony. Much of what passes for deep historical insight is essentially a recap of lessons America has already ignored. Analysts point to past campaigns as cautionary tales, but the patterns, overconfidence, resource misallocation, and a dash of hubris seem almost to have been hard-coded into the national DNA. It's as if history is a recurring TV show, and every new season stars the same cast, repeating the same plot lines, only with fancier technology and more dramatic explosions. So as we sit on the edge of our chairs, or couches, laptops balanced precariously on knees, we are reminded of the sobering truth. Understanding history is essential, but understanding history in Washington is mostly about knowing which charts to show and which catchy quotes to repeat. And if you enjoy this sort of sharp commentary with a side of historical roast, you know what to do. Subscribe to the Refoundation channel, because where else will you get the fun, the fury, and the occasional facepalm delivered in high definition? Next, we'll look at early reports from the battlefield, including who's hit, who's alive, and who's already planning a very angry Zoom call to the Pentagon. In the theater of war, there is always the difference between what is reported and what is actually happening. Think of it as reality versus a very expensive action movie directed by generals in fatigues. This morning, as the sun rose over the Middle East, early reports began trickling in, and the pattern is familiar. Explosions, uncertainty, and the occasional journalist trying to make sense of a map that looks like a toddler attacked it with crayons. Casualties have been reported in several areas, but according to preliminary intelligence, the ultimate targets, the president and supreme leader of Iran, appear to have survived the initial strikes. For military planners, this is equivalent to spending months baking a complicated cake only to realize that the candles haven't lit. The main objective remains intact, and now the operation must scramble to improvise. The significance of this cannot be overstated. The initial phase of the campaign, often referred to in military jargon as a decapitation strike, is intended to neutralize leadership swiftly enough to paralyze the enemy's command structure. If those key figures remain unscathed, the intended advantage is gone, and the dominoes begin to wobble. Suddenly, the plan is no longer a tidy sequence of operations, but a messy game of resource management, improvisation, and high-stakes guesswork. The adversary's response has been as dramatic as it has been rapid. Reports suggest attacks or alerts have occurred across multiple locations, hosting U.S. forces and allied infrastructure. This is not a slow, measured escalation. It is a vivid demonstration of what military analysts have long called an existential response. When a government feels genuinely threatened, it mobilizes everything it has, and sometimes things it probably shouldn't, toward survival. What's unfolding in these early hours highlights the unpredictable nature of modern warfare. Even with advanced intelligence, satellite imagery, and wargaming simulations, the first sparks of conflict have a way of defying expectations. Civilians, journalists, and military strategists alike are left scrambling to interpret events that are simultaneously historical and instantaneous, global and local, strategic and absurd. The immediate takeaway is sobering. Wars do not unfold on PowerPoint slides. They unfold in real time, with all the chaos, improvisation, and unexpected consequences that human beings can produce when resources, egos, and geopolitics collide. Here's where things get truly delicious in a darkly strategic sense. Wars are rarely lost in battle. They're lost in the boardrooms, briefing rooms, and PowerPoint slides where someone confidently claimed, "This will be simple." And now the United States faces a classic problem, one that any history-loving, coffee-addled strategist could have predicted, but politicians apparently didn't read the memo on. The targets survived, and that ruins everything. It's the military equivalent of trying to refill a bucket with a hole in the bottom while simultaneously running to put out 3 other fires. And yes, the bucket is on fire too. This isn't just bad luck, it's strategic arithmetic of failure. Modern warfare is unforgivingly precise in its logic. If you fail to achieve the objective of Phase 1, the cost of Phase 2 rises exponentially. Ammunition, aircraft, and personnel are finite. Every extra missile spent on old targets is a missile not available for new targets. Every sortie redirected from its original purpose delays the overall campaign and strains the logistical apparatus. And all the while, your adversary observes, adapts, and, frankly, probably laughs a little at your increasingly creative interpretations of precision. The broader implication for U.S. planners is stark. Leadership survival transforms what was intended as a short, surgical strike into a protracted engagement with cascading costs. Time, resources, and political capital are all drained at a far faster rate than anyone projected. The arithmetic is brutal, but predictable for those who pay attention to the logic of phased military campaigns. It is worth noting that this is not a hypothetical problem. History is littered with the debris of operations gone awry due to initial miscalculations. From the Gulf War to more recent conflicts, initial phases rarely survive scrutiny when leadership targets prove elusive. Let's get one thing straight. Modern wars are not won on courage alone, Hollywood heroics, or inspirational speeches about freedom. No, they are won, or spectacularly lost, on resources, the kind that generals check like accountants obsessing over a budget that's already gone rogue. The United States boasts a military arsenal that would make a Bond villain weep with envy. Aircraft carriers, stealth fighters, precision missiles, and an industrial capacity capable of producing enough gadgets to outfit a small planet. But here's the punchline. Even the mightiest arsenal is finite. Every bomb dropped, every missile launched, every sortie flown chips away at the stockpile. Unlike streaming services or energy drinks, there's no auto-renewal. When the warehouse runs dry, your ability to influence the battlefield evaporates faster than a soda left in the sun. In the months leading up to this conflict, American generals and admirals reportedly raised concerns about the adequacy of munitions. Their warnings were precise, sober, and, if you were listening carefully, ominous. It's not just a matter of counting bullets and bombs. Modern warfare is a finely tuned calculus. Every asset must be allocated to a target sequence that maximizes impact and minimizes waste. Divert a missile from one target to another, and you might prevent an immediate strike, but you've now created a hole somewhere else. Run out of munitions at the wrong time, and even the most advanced aircraft are reduced to very expensive paperweights. Time, it turns out, is as deadly a weapon as any missile, and far less glamorous in press photos. Before the first missile ever soared over the horizon, there were voices in Washington that sounded suspiciously like common sense, those of the military leadership. For months, generals and admirals reportedly warned that the available munitions and operational resources were insufficient to carry out the ambitious objectives of this campaign. Their concern was precise, technical, and completely unromantic. And yet, in the theater of politics, warnings are often interpreted as pessimism, or, worse, party pooping. The generals were the proverbial boy crying reality check, while the political chorus insisted the show must go on. Here's the bitterly funny part. When a general says, "If this war lasts 5 weeks, we will run out of ammunition," they are not issuing a dramatic flourish. They are stating a cold, verifiable fact. Unlike a pundit on cable news, they can back it up with spreadsheets, supply manifests, and a career's worth of operational experience. And yet, the public narrative often frames it as optional, worst-case thinking. Spoiler alert, worst-case thinking has a way of arriving on schedule. In the early hours of this conflict, it became evident that the general's warnings were not alarmist. They were prophetic. At the heart of every modern air campaign is a concept that sounds like it belongs in a board game, but is terrifyingly real: the target deck. No, it's not a new collectible card game or the latest Marvel expansion. It's a meticulously prioritized list of objectives that the military intends to destroy, neutralize, or otherwise inconvenience until the enemy is too busy ducking to fight back. Every target deck is designed with obsessive precision. Command centers, missile silos, communication hubs, and occasionally that one suspicious building that looks vaguely important on Google Maps. But here's the punchline. The system only works if the enemy behaves like the carefully drawn diagrams predict. And as anyone who has ever played chess with a cat knows, the opponent rarely follows the script. If Phase 1 fails, say the leadership survives, the entire sequence unravels. Resources intended for later phases must be diverted back to incomplete objectives, producing the strategic equivalent of a traffic jam on the freeway during rush hour, only with missiles. American planners are now juggling targets like flaming bowling pins. History provides cautionary precedent. During the Gulf War, specialized units were deployed to neutralize Iraq's ballistic missile capability in the opening phase. The plan was clear. Accomplish this task, then reallocate precious resources to other missions. But when initial objectives weren't fully completed, follow-up operations became constrained, timelines stretched, and budgets exceeded. All lessons that today's planners have memorized but are watching unfold anyway, live. The target deck is both a marvel of strategic planning and a stark reminder of the limits of control. If the target deck was a carefully stacked row of dominoes, the first phase's failure is the gust of wind that sends them scattering in all directions. Except these dominoes are armed, explosive, and very upset about being knocked over. It's a logistical nightmare that makes juggling chainsaws look like a relaxing hobby. Modern warfare operates on finite munitions, fuel, and operational capacity. It's a cascading sequence of failure, and unlike a movie, there is no director to yell "cut" before things get worse. If there's one thing history loves, it's a repeat performance, especially when the cast refuses to read the script. Take the Gulf War in 1991. The first phase was slower and more complex than anticipated, forcing commanders to reallocate assets mid-operation. Result: timelines stretched, budgets ballooned, and stress levels among staff officers hit record highs. Or consider Afghanistan and Iraq in the 2000s, wars that taught the grim lesson that tactical victories can coexist with strategic stagnation. In other words, winning a battle does not guarantee winning the war. If the first phase was a misfired starter pistol, the regional response is the full-on fireworks show nobody asked for, but everyone is watching. Reports indicate that strikes, alerts, and military maneuvers have already occurred in Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and even as far afield as Tel Aviv and Haifa. Essentially, every location housing U.S. or allied forces in the region is suddenly part of a very high-stakes game of Risk, but with missiles, drones, and the occasional panicked press conference. The striking feature of this response is its intensity and immediacy. This is not a contained engagement. It is a rapidly expanding theater with implications far beyond initial expectations. From a strategic standpoint, this is the nightmare scenario that every general feared. When leadership survives the initial decapitation strike, not only does the enemy buy time, but they also coordinate a multi-front counteroffensive. The arithmetic of failure continues to compound, and what might have been a surgical strike has evolved into an operational wildfire. What we see unfolding is more than a regional military conflict. It is a real-time demonstration of strategy, hubris, and human error all playing out on a global stage. History, logic, and military prudence all converge on the same lesson. Wars are rarely won by intention alone. For the United States and its allies, the coming days will test not just military capability, but judgment, foresight, and the ability to manage cascading failure under intense scrutiny. Stability is fragile, strategy is costly, and survival sometimes is the ultimate form of resistance. In the end, the unfolding conflict is a story of cause and consequence, caution ignored, and the relentless arithmetic of war, a lesson for leaders, analysts, and anyone who still believes that PowerPoint slides can replace reality. And for the best running commentary, with the kind of snarky insight that makes you question how anyone survived high school civics class, then of course, don't forget to subscribe to the Refound Foundation channel, because who else will give you the news with both a straight face and a raised eyebrow?